Hello everybody, it's Bernadette here, Simply Be Art. Thank you for joining me for another video. I sincerely hope that you are all keeping well. In today's video, I'm going to be making a lavender curls melt and pour soap. I will be using 300 grams of clear unscented melt and pour soap base. And I will also be using 800 grams of opaque white, unfragranced melt and pour soap base. I will be using lavender fragrance, lavender oil, and I will also be coloring both batches of soap purple. I will be using the 300 grams of clear base for my curls, and the rest of the loaf will be made up with the 800 grams of the opaque white. So let's get started. Now the first step in this process to make this lavender curl soap loaf is to first prepare the curls, and for that I will be using the 300 grams of clear soap base. I'm going to melt this down, and then I will be adding 5 milliliters of the lavender fragrance, and I'm going to be coloring it a very deep purple because I want this to stand out from the rest of the soap loaf. So let me melt this down and then I'll bring you back. Now my clear soap base is melted nicely. Remember, you melt in 30-second intervals in the microwave, and then you will stir until everything has been properly melted. Please remember that the 30 seconds is very important because you can easily burn your soap and you don't want that to happen. So now I'm going to be adding my color first. I always add color first because the soap is very hot. If I'm going to add my fragrance at this point, the fragrance is just going to evaporate faster. So I will always add my color first. And for that, I'm going to be using a purple soap color dye. And I will be using the medicine dropper. This medicine dropper I got from my local Clicks store here in Cape Town. So it's always important to measure, to drop your colorant, color dye or soap dye, one drop at a time, and then you will stir it through. I just want to put the lid on here. Here we go. So I want to stir it through until I reach the desired color that I want for my curls, or embeds you call them. Embeds is soap that you shape and you include it as part of the soap loaf to give it a nice pattern or design. I still want my color to be darker. I want this to be a really vibrant, rich purple. So I'm going to make this really, really dark. But once again, you have to do it slowly, slowly. There's no rush when you're doing this process. Enjoy the process. Another 2 drops I've added, so in total I've got 6 drops in here already. I'm going to add just another 2, and then I think I'm happy with that. I'll be happy with that color. Another 2, 1, 2. Yes, I wanted a nice deep rich, vibrant color. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to add the fragrance now. Because this is only 300 grams, I'm going to only add 5 milliliters. And the rest, the 15 milliliters, I will add into this batch once it's melted. Remember that for 1 kilogram of soap, you have to use 2% or 20 milliliters. That's 5 milliliters. I'm going to stir that through now. And then I'm going to show you how you prepare your lavender coals to use as embeds in this lavender coals melt and pour soap loaf. So don't stray or go away. We'll be right back. Now to make your lavender coals, you're going to need a baking tray. I don't use this baking tray in my kitchen. This baking tray is specially for soap making, and I've lined it with a piece of baking paper or parchment paper. And into this baking tray, I'm going to pour the 300 grams of soap that we've just colored and fragranced with our lavender. That's what you want. This is going to set now. It's going to set completely. And then we're going to turn it into coals that we will use as embeds in our loaf. I'm going to spray it with the rubbing alcohol just to remove any excess bubbles. So this tray with the 300 grams of melted clear base soap will be left to set for about 15 minutes, and then we will remove it from the parchment paper and we will curl it to fit into our loaf, and on top of that we will add the rest of our soap to make our loaf. Now the next step in our soap making process to make our lavender coal soap loaf is to melt down the 800 grams of the opaque white soap base, the melt and pour soap base. And once it is melted, I'm going to add 15 milliliters of the lavender fragrance, and I'm going to color it with a purple dye to the desired color that I want for this part of the loaf. So let's melt this down. So my white soap is now melted, and it's taken about 4 minutes to melt this 800 grams, and I took it out of the microwave every 30 to 45 seconds just to give it a stir. I'm going to add my color to this now, and then I will add 15 milliliters of the lavender fragrance. So let's do the color first. I want this to be a really pale pastel lavender color, so I've put 2 drops in, and we're going to stir that through and see if that's the color that I like. I want to go just a shade darker, so I'm going to add 1 extra drop. I like that color lavender. I'm going to add the 15 milliliters of lavender fragrance to this now. That's 5. 10, 15. And now we'll stir that through, incorporate that into your soap. Now this is piping hot. It needs to cool down to about 53 degrees Celsius before we can merge this with the embeds. So while this is cooling, we're going to finish off our lavender curls, or embeds as we call it. I'm going to set this aside now until a little bit later. So this is the embeds that have been cooling while I've been melting down and coloring and fragrancing this batch of soap. This has been setting, and all you're going to do is you're going to pull it away from your baking paper. It comes off fairly easy. And then you're going to cut it into strips, because we want to just use a sharp edged knife to cut it into about 2.5 centimeter strips, because we want to curl them and put them into our loaf mold. So just cut them into equal. And you don't want your embeds, you don't want this to be setting all night, because you want it to be pliable like this so that you can curl them. Otherwise, if they set up too hard, it's going to break, and you don't want them. You see, they're cracking. If they set up too hard, they're going to break. Once you've curled them, you want to spray them with rubbing alcohol, because the alcohol forms a binder or a glue, or almost an adhesive with the rest of your soap. Once you've sprayed it with alcohol, you're going to put it into your loaf, and you go ahead and you do that with all of the strips. So I'm going to do that with all of the strips, and then I'm going to bring you back. So I've curled all my embeds. They're nicely spiraled, and I'm going to spray them with rubbing alcohol now. Nice and liberal, all in the crevices. You want to get this rubbing alcohol. And now I'm going to add them into my loaf. I have an extra one, but I don't need to use that. I can melt this down and pour it on top of my loaf. So that's what it looks like. My soap has been cooling down, and it's got a little skin on the top, which is fine. I'm going to add this to the rest of my soap now, because the temperature should be fine to pour on top. If it's hotter than this, it's going to melt down the embeds, and you don't want that. The temperature is 51.7. That's fine. It can be anywhere between 50 and 53. I'm going to pour this on top of my embeds now. Actually have too much. I'm going to take that out, and we can melt that down, and we can add it on top of the loaf. So you can play around with your soap. Make it as fun and as funky as you want it to be. I'm going to spray the top, because I see there are a few bubbles that I want to do away with. I'm going to let this rest for a minute while I melt this down, and then we're going to pour this on top of this loaf and give it an extra pizzazz to the loaf. Be right back. So the few extra embeds that were left, I've melted it down. It's piping hot. I'm going to wait till it cools down a bit to about 53 degrees Celsius, and then I'm going to add it on top to give this a nice smooth edge. Let's quickly see what temperature this is. It's 69.1, and it's far too hot for me to add into this loaf. If I do that, I'm going to completely immerse this batch of soap into that light lavender color, and that's not what I want. I want the two layers to really be distinct in this loaf. So my soap is ready to be added to the top of this loaf. I'm going to spray it again with rubbing alcohol. This is a very important step. You cannot miss this step, or your soap will separate when you use it. So I'm going to pour this on top now. One more squirt. And there you have it. A beautiful lavender curls soap. This soap loaf will have to stand overnight or during the day if you're making soap early morning for at least 12 hours before we're going to attempt to remove it from this loaf. So once it is set, when we're ready to cut, I'll bring you back. Our soap is ready to be unmolded. It's been about 12 hours and it's now finally set. I'm going to just ply it away from the container, and that way you know that the soap is also ready to come out. So let's pop this out quickly. Just 2 thumbs, little bit of pressure, and out it comes. Easy as that. Oh, the mold looks beautiful. That's our bar of lavender curls soap. Let's cut this. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to slide it into the miter until it gets to this marker point here. It's about 2 centimeters. And then I'm going to cut it with my knife. And that's the first bar. Isn't that gorgeous? It smells super. Let's do another bar. So pretty. So here it is, 8 bars of Lavender Curls Melt and Pour soap. Successfully poured and cut. Tell me what you think. Leave your comments below. I'd like to hear from you. Like and subscribe and share. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care everyone. Stay well. Bye for now.